Thank you, Rabbi Klickfeld. Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, etc., and so forth. So, I'm glad you have your Chumashim handy because you can follow along as I go through some various sections. The question is, what really happened at the rock? Okay, in other words, the rock, not the first rock that we read about in the book of Exodus. That was very fine, no problem. Second one was the situation that happened later, which we read about in chapter 20 of Bamidbar, of Numbers, which is part of Parashat Chukat, which is the Parsha, the Torah portion that we read, that Rosemary read for us beautifully earlier. So, but before we look at that, we have to do one little piece of background. So if you please open up to Numbers chapter 17. It's on verse 8. It's on page 868. Okay, so what has happened is the destruction of Korach and his people has taken place, but the people are still angry at Moses and Aaron because they said, look at all the people you killed. And clearly they didn't digest the fact that it wasn't they who did it, it was God, right? Because if you know the story, when Moses says to the people, you're going to see something that you've never seen before. God's going to create a new bria, a brand new creation right in front of your eyes and destroy these people. And indeed, there was this, presumably an earthquake. The earth split open and the whole Korach crew fell in. But then the Levites, whom Korach brought together with burning incense that they should not have brought forward, 250 of them, fire came down and destroyed them. That's like, where else do we read about fire coming down and destroying people who brought improper incense into the tabernacle? Aaron's sons, exactly. Datan and Abiram, right.
God was pretty incensed about it.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Anyhow, incense. Oh, ha, ha. Good. All right, go ahead. All right, anyhow, so after all of this, the people don't get it. They're still angry at them. And God, Moses, they don't know what to do. So God says, listen, there was a plague. I'm not going to go into that. He says, here, page 868, beginning verse 21, okay? So you can follow along in the Hebrew or the English. I'll read the English. Moses spoke thus to the Israelites. Their chieftains gave him a staff for each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Among these, the staff that was of Aaron. Okay? And now remember, this was the staff. You're going to see what happens. Just a second. This is Aaron's staff. Okay, Moses deposited the staffs before Adonai in the tent of the pact. Okay, ha'edut. The pact means that's the covenant, which means it's the ark that contains the stones with the 10 commandments. Okay? All right, so that's what they do. They put it down. The next day, Moses entered into the tent of the pact, and there were the staffs of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted. It brought forth sprouts, produced blossoms, and bore almonds. Moses then brought out all the staffs before Adonai to the Israelites. Each identified and recovered their staff. And so Adonai says to Moses, so this proves that Aaron is the choice of God for the priest to be high priest, and the whole propaganda, the whole fake news that Korach had developed about him was totally a big lie. Okay? So then, closely, Adonai says to Moses, put Aaron's staff back before the pact. So now where is he putting it? Inside the tabernacle. It doesn't say whether it was right in front of the ark, which would be a challenge because the Shekhinah is there. Okay, but we don't know, but it's inside, in front of, at some point in front of the ark, right, that contains the pact. Okay, so that's where it's been placed. And here's the thing. It's a lesson to rebels. And the term for rebels here is B'nai Meri in the Hebrew. B'nai Meri, it sounds like happy sons, right? Meri, ha. Meri is a form of the Hebrew root memresh he or memresh shud, which means to rebel. So B'nai Meri means people who are rebels. Okay, people who are rebels. Okay, so what he says is, they're a lesson to the rebels so that their mutterings against me may cease, lest they die. Okay, so the point is, the idea would be somehow Moses would bring that out, show this to whomever it is that's rebelling. It would remind them of what happened to Korach's rebels and to the whole incident, and they will stop rebelling. Okay, that's the whole purpose of it. So Moses did as Adonai commanded him, so he did. All right, everything sounds well and good. Okay, now let's turn to chapter 20, which is this week's Parashat Chukat, and we're going to start looking. All right, so here the problem at the beginning is, I'll just summarize. Once again, the people are thirsty for water. They're in the wilderness. The Midrash tells us, right before that, we hear that Miriam had died, okay? And then right after that, it says that the people had nothing to drink. The Midrash tells us it was because of the merit of Miriam that this magical well kept following through the wilderness. It was a miracle. Miriam died, so her presence was gone, so the merit that Miriam represented no longer existed. No more water. So now you got to keep in mind something else. It would appear, it's not exact, we don't know for sure, but most of the people who study this tell us this was 40 years, it's at the end of the wandering that this is taking place. And so the people now who come to Moses and complain and say, why did you take us, Moses and Aaron, why did you take us out of Egypt? Words we know from before, right? No water here, etc. Who are these people? The next generation, right? And they're sounding like their parents. Well, the parents must have done a great job of indoctrinating their kids about all the source that they had in the wilderness. Okay, so it's the next generation. Now, they themselves experienced it undoubtedly too. That was very frustrating to Moses, as you're going to hear. Okay, so now what's he supposed to do? So God says to them, verse 8, okay? Verse 8 is on page 884. Okay, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. So again, you and Aaron take the rod, all right? The mateh. Which rod? Now, there has been discussion as to which rod, because actually there were two rods. Moses had his own rod, and in chapter 16 or 17 of Exodus, where he hits the rock then, and that was an approved hitting, that was Moses' rod. Now, this is Aaron's rod. Remember, what was the purpose of Aaron's rod? To have it as a sign to the rebels not to rebel. That's all. That's what he said. That's what we read before here in chapter 17, right? Okay, and where is that rod sitting? In the tabernacle, before the Yedud, right? Okay. So he says, take the rod, assemble the community, and before their eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Does he have to do anything with the rod? No, because just having it present is supposed to be enough to remind the people, don't rebel, okay? So you just speak to the rock. You shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. So Vayikach Moshe et hamateh lifnei Adonai. Moses took the mateh that was before God, meaning before the edut, right? Because if it is before the ark, where is God's presence found? In the Mishkan. Where is God's presence? Right on top of the ark. So here's God's presence. Here's the ark. Where's the rod? Right in front of it. That's Aaron's rod. That's where he put it. That's what it says, yes? Okay, so now what happens? He did what God told him to do. So then he gathers everybody by this rock, and he says to them, Shimu na hamorim. Let's stop there. Listen now, you rebels. Now, would you expect someone to call a people rebels if they're carrying that rod? Yes, because who is this? For whom is the rod? B'nai Mary. It's what it said. Mary, right? Morim is the same word in the plural. Shimunaha Morim. Remember this, oh, you rebels. So now it sounds like he's doing exactly what God said to do. Tell them, explain to them, show them the rod. Here, you rebels. Look at the rod, look at the rod. And then what was Moses supposed to do? Turn to the rock and say, oh, rock, bring forth water. Okay? Or perhaps even better, the Lord God will now cause you to bring forth water. All right? Something, we don't know, but something like that. That's what he was supposed to do. What does he do? So, first of all, he says, can we bring forth water from this rock? Hamin hasela hazenu tzilachem mayim. Can we bring forth water? Who? Who's the we? People. No, who's going to bring forth the water? Can we? Who's he talking for? Aaron and himself. Aaron and himself. Who's the other? Who's we? It's not God. Right? God. He doesn't say anything about God, does he? Does it say, will God, you really? So he says, do you think that we will bring forth water? Keep that in mind. Up until this time, whenever Moses spoke to the people, in whose name did he speak? God's. Every single time. This is the first time that he injects himself and Aaron into the process. Got to keep that in mind. That's a biggie. Okay? So then what does it say? Moses, this is verse 11. Moses picks up his hand and hits the rock twice with his staff, and a lot of water comes out. So in spite of the fact that Moses and Aaron, as you will now find out, have committed a heinous crime, God wants water to come out for the people, right? Because he has Rahmanas on him, because God is a compassionate God. Okay, so the water comes. And then God gets very angry at him, and he says, Adonai says to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land I have given them. Okay. These are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with Adonai, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. In other words, the fact that they had the experience and God brought forth the water, but the fact is, Moses and Aaron, particularly Moses, did not bring God into the equation at all. He did not sanctify God. He did not say, God is going to do this for you. And that's what he should have done. Instead, it sounded like he and Aaron are doing it. That's the problem. Okay? And because of that, he and Aaron could not go into the land. Now you can ask, okay, why Aaron? Why Aaron? What did he do?
He let Moses take his staff.
Nothing. I would have hoped Aaron would have had the seichel to say, Moish, that's my staff. you're going to use it for something that God didn't tell you. As soon as he picked up as soon as Moses picked it up, remember, he hit it twice. It was only after the second time, apparently, that the water came out. Right? So Aaron should have said, stop! God said, talk to the rock. Don't misuse my rod that God sanctified. But he said nothing. So through silence, shtika kahodaya, silence marks consent. That's what happened. So therefore he was considered in God's eyes. Now, so people ask, was this such a bad thing? What happened to all those decades, 40 years of service that God, that Moshe in particular, and Aaron too, gave to God? Doesn't it count for something? Absolutely it did. But the fact that this man, now, as his days are ending, or as it turns out, but the point is, as this man, at this stage, with the next generation who should have the concept of God's protection and God's love and God's sanctity pounded into them, especially because they are the ones who raised the issue in the first place, right? He should have done whatever he had to do to say, no, no, no. God will take care of you. That God is here, he'll help you. Nothing. Not at that moment. And it's critical. I mean, the fact is, minor rebellions continue to happen after this. You continue reading Numbers. Remember, there's with the horrible snakes that come out. I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole other story. But the thing is, these young people, they were not really fully ready. In the end, they do go in with Joshua, and they play the role that they're supposed to play. But right now, that's not clear. So that was the sin. All right. If you go to the end of the chapter, okay, go to verse 23. It's not the exam, near the end. Okay. All right. So now Aaron is going to get his punishment. He's now going to die on Hor HaHar. That's a known mountain. People knew where it is. Mount Hor is what it's called. All right. Why? So verses 23 and 24, what does it say? At Mount Hor, on the boundary of the land of Edom, Adonai said to Moses and Aaron. This is on, I told you the page, yes? No, I didn't. 887, yeah, okay. He says to them, let Aaron be gathered to his kin. He's not to enter the land I have assigned to the Israelite people, because you disobeyed my command about the waters of Meribah. Now look at the verb. Atem meritem. It's the same verb. Right? It's the same verb as b'nai Meri. It's the same verb as Hamorim. Same verb. Now, who is God using that term against? Aaron. Moses and Aaron. Yeah. That's Aaron right now, right? It's ironic. In other words, that event was, in God's eyes, was so heinous that they fell, because of that, to the level of rebels. Because, in fact, they rebelled. They did not follow the word of God. Now go to Numbers 27. Okay? And let's look at 27 verses 12 to 14. And that is on page 928 at the top. Now God's going to say the same thing to Moses. He will now tell him what's going to happen with him. Verse 12, Adonai said to Moses, ascend these heights of Abarim and view the land that I have given to the Israelite people. All right? When you have seen it, you too shall be gathered to your kin, just as your brother was. For in the wilderness of Sin, when the community was contentious, you disobeyed my command to uphold my sanctity in their sight by means of the water. Those are the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Sin. And what does it say here again? Here. Ka'asher meritem pi, because you rebelled against my command. The same verb again. So 4 times the verb is used. First, with respect to the staff, creation of the staff, giving it its status. Secondly, what Moses says to the rebels who were rebelling. And third and fourth, what God says Moses and Aaron did. So the point is, it wasn't Moses' staff. It was Aaron's staff. And it was now the property. Whose property did it become? Where was it situated? Where was it kept? Where? In front of the ark, in the tabernacle. So this it was sanctified. And that's probably what Aaron's mistake was. He should have had a say in it because he was responsible for all of the kelim, all the vessels that were inside of that tabernacle. And he should have stood up to his brother and said, no, no, no. But he didn't. And of course, Moses was the man who took the lead in this whole process. And for whatever the reasons, I think he just, to be blunt, he lost it. He lost it. I mean, I can imagine why. For 40 years he had to put up with this. With the generation who came out of Egypt, the generation of slaves. And after all that, who is now echoing their parents? The next generation. He says, oh my God. And he just lost it. I think there are a number of messages that come out of this. Obviously, the point being that God expects that people will adhere to his word. And if Moses and Aaron would have gotten away with this, then clearly it would appear it's not so bad, right? It's not so bad. And secondly, Moses took it upon himself and Aaron to be the actors in this drama. And they weren't supposed to be. Third, Moses, at different points in his career, comes close to being a kind of superhuman. The time when this becomes most notable is after he comes down with the tablets that were in that ark. And here we're talking toward the end of Shemot, of Exodus. When he comes down with those tablets, what has happened to him, to his person? Remember? His face. It's not raised, that's a mistake. It doesn't say his head, that there were lights. His face, Karan, glowed.
Yeah, Michelangelo made
His face glowed. And presumably that came because he was with God doing what he did, and that he was exposed to the divine power, and he absorbed some of it. It's the only thing we can understand. In fact, the people were afraid to look at him, so every time he walked out of the tabernacle, Mishkan, he wore a veil. It says so. And when he went inside, talked to God, he'd take it off. Because they looked at him, they said, it was frightening. Anyway, so, and the man obviously, God says, earlier on, we've excuse me, we've read this already. When Miriam and Aaron basically badmouth Moses, right? So God says, in all of my household, Moses is revered. That's what he says. Behold BT. Moses was part, somehow, of God's entourage. But God's entourage are heavenly creatures, right? Angels. So the fact that this is how, this is how God wants him to be perceived. It sounds like it's moving in the direction of deification, of making Moses into a god. And the Bible at some points has to draw a line and say, no. What was Moses? Ultimately, a human being. A human being with special authority, even special powers. A human being who was pushed the people, who was dedicated to the people. Dedicated to the people, we know that. 3 times he saves the people. What are the 3 times? What's the first time? When does Moses save the people by arguing with God?
With a golden calf.
The golden calf. What's the second time?
Mana?
What?
The one that only complained about only having mana?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay.
What's the second time? The spies, the scouts, right? That's almost a repeat of what happened after the golden calf. When's the third time?
Korach, right?
Yes, we read it today.
But how about when he kills them?
God says to Moses and Aaron, move away from them because I'm going to destroy the people. And Moses responds, you're going to do the innocent along with the guilty? And God says, okay. Tell the people to move back. I'm quoting. That was in the Torah reading this morning. So those are the 3 times. It takes a special person to be able to stand up to God like that. And now you understand God's disappointment in Moses. He had the power. Right? He had, the other thing, of course, that keep getting Moses angry is that the people constantly said, why did you take us out of Egypt? For some reason, they had the image that he was the factor, that this concept that God ultimately did it, and that's why, go ahead.
Left out of the Haggadah.
That's probably why he was left out of the Haggadah, because the whole Haggadah teaches this is a love affair between God and Israel. And they focus on the fact, and Moses' intermediary function becomes blurring that. So the Haggadah is God and us. It's Song of Songs. That's, remember, it's viewed as the love, Song of Songs is read Pesach time.
I always feel, he should have been allowed to go into the promised land.
Well, no, but that's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. Obviously, God disagreed. Okay, but you're missing the message here, though. If I'm right, the message is, don't think, and this is for subsequent generations of people reading this. I'm talking biblical times. We know that idolatry within Israel was a major issue for centuries. Read Elijah the prophet, right? Read what it says about Solomon, that in his old age he even tended toward idolatry himself, built some temples for idols because of his women, because he had married pagan women, okay? And then you read Hosea, read Jeremiah, read Ezekiel, read Isaiah. What do they say all the time? They're worshiping idols, right? So idolatry was, the polytheism, belief in more than one God, was an issue throughout the biblical period. Okay? And one final point. Where was Moses buried? We have no idea.
No, that's another.
Right. He'll be brought up to the top of that mountain, and it says specifically at the end of Devarim, we don't know to this day when where Moses was buried. Why?
They didn't want him to be idolized and be
Literally, okay? I remind you, there was a great amount of Egyptian influence in Eretz Yisrael into the time of the Israelite settlement. Okay, until about 1150, Egypt ran Eretz Yisrael. It was part of their empire. In and out, sometimes it broke off, but because, there were Canaanites there. Anyhow, when is it that the Egyptian pharaohs became deified? Not while they were alive, after they died. That's when they came to be viewed as gods. So my point is, in the end, it probably was, this was yet another step to guarantee that worship of a human being not enter into the picture. Even the great Moses makes a fatal error, and he has to be punished because he's got to be an accessible model for a human being who accepts God's authority.
Right after the burial part, in Moses' great leadership, he right away said, God, you need to have another shepherd with the flock. And that's when God appointed Joshua.
Yes, right.
So it's another good model.
Well, the point is the same thing, yeah, but and it points to the need for a next generation because, new leadership. And of course, you see that right here because when I moved out, you had a new leader. And he has brought you into the promised land. Look around. Joshua. Don't call me Boish.
Mr. Clark, Rabbi Rembaum, Mr. Clark. This was the first.